She had survived 2 combat tours, 3 firefights, and 1 roadside bomb that took her hearing for 6 days. But the night that nearly broke her wasn't in a desert. It was in a restaurant on the corner of 47th and Lexington, during a thunderstorm nobody saw coming. One second, she was holding a tray of pasta. The next, a man's hand was locked around her wrist like a vice, and something ancient and dangerous woke up inside her chest. She didn't mean to drop him, but she did, and someone in that room was watching and smiling. If this story already has you hooked, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel. The rain had been coming down sideways for the better part of 2 hours when Aria Mercer decided the night was trying to tell her something. She didn't believe in signs anymore. Hadn't for a long time. But standing outside the service entrance of Rosario's on 47th Street, watching cigarette ash dissolve into the puddles collecting on the asphalt, she felt something tighten behind her sternum. The same pressure she used to feel in the Humvee before the road changed. She crushed the cigarette under her heel and pushed through the door. The kitchen smelled like garlic, scorched butter, and the particular desperation of a Friday service that had already gone sideways before 8 o'clock. Mario, the head chef, was screaming at a line cook in rapid-fire Italian. The dishwasher, a kid named Teo, who couldn't have been older than 19, was running 3 stations at once with the hollow eyes of a person who had long stopped expecting fairness from the universe. Aria grabbed her apron off the hook without being asked, tied it around her waist, and stepped into the flood. "Table 9's been waiting 22 minutes, said Claudette, the other server, without looking up from the receipt she was tallying. Claudette had been working Rosario's for 11 years. She had the posture of a woman who had absorbed every insult the restaurant industry could produce and had simply stopped registering them as insults. They already sent their bread back. "I'll take it," Aria said. "They're going to be horrible." "They're always horrible on a Friday." Claudette finally looked up. Something passed across her face. Not pity, exactly. More like the tired recognition shared between 2 people who both know what it costs to keep showing up. "Your brother called today?" Aria's jaw shifted, just slightly. "He's fine." "That's not what I asked." "Claudette." "Okay." Claudette turned back to her receipts. "Table 9. See? The dining room at Rosario's was warm in the way that expensive restaurants calculated warmth. Amber lighting positioned to make everyone look slightly better than they were, the kind of background music that cost someone a lot of money to sound accidental. The tables were always at capacity on Fridays. People came here to close deals, end relationships, celebrate promotions they hadn't fully earned. Aria had learned to read the room the moment she walked in. It was the same skill she'd used in Fallujah, and the fact that she now applied it to tracking which table was one wrong order away from demanding the manager didn't escape her. Table 9 was a party of 6. 4 men in suits that hadn't been bought off any rack, and 2 women who had the carefully composed expressions of people who had attended many business dinners and understood their role in them. At the head of the table sat a man Aria clocked immediately, not because he was the loudest, though he was, but because of the way the other 5 oriented themselves around him, the way compass needles find north. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, with silver hair slicked back from a face that had spent a lot of time deciding it was the most important face in whatever room it occupied. His tie was loosened exactly 1 degree, the practiced looseness of a man who wanted to appear relaxed while remaining in absolute control. His name, she would later learn, was Gerald Holt. She didn't know it yet. She didn't need to. "Good evening," Aria said, stopping at the table with the level, measured calm she'd been rehearsing for 4 years. "I'm Aria. I'll be taking care of you tonight. My apologies for the wait. What can I bring you to start?" Holt didn't look up from his phone. One of the other men, younger, eager, the kind of ambitious that hadn't yet curdled into cruelty, jumped in to order drinks. Aria wrote them down without drama. She brought them back without incident. She took the food order. She managed the substitutions, absorbed the complaint about the noise level near the kitchen, and did not allow her face to change when Holt interrupted her twice mid-sentence to make a point to someone else at the table. She was very good at making herself small. She had practiced it the way other people practiced an instrument. The problem came at 9:14. She was refilling water when Holt's salmon arrived. Perfectly cooked, perfectly plated, not a single element out of order. She set it down in front of him with both hands. He looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. Send it back. Is there something wrong with... I said I wanted the lemon on the side. Arya paused. She had written the order exactly as it was given. She kept her voice neutral. I can bring a separate dish of lemon if you'd like. It'll only take a moment. I don't want a separate dish. Holt's voice hadn't risen, and somehow that was worse. I want the dish made correctly. Is that so complicated? Or is that above your pay grade? The table went quiet in the specific way that tables go quiet when everyone knows something has crossed a line, but no one is going to say so. I'll have it remade, Arya said. She took the plate. She walked back to the kitchen. She stood for a moment with both hands flat against the stainless steel of the prep counter and breathed through her nose the way her therapist had taught her, the one she'd seen twice and then stopped calling back because the copay was another bill she couldn't manage. In, out. The pressure behind her sternum did not go away, but she could work with pressure. Pressure was familiar. Mario looked at the plate. What's wrong with it? Lemon placement. He stared at her. Then he moved the lemon. Arya carried the plate back out. She set it down in front of Holt again. Smiled. Moved to check on the table beside them. She was writing down a dessert order when she heard his voice, louder now, carrying the deliberate clarity of a man accustomed to being heard across rooms. These places hire anyone these days. That's the problem. No standards, no training. She didn't turn around. She finished writing. Thanked the couple at the dessert table. Turned. Holt was looking at her. Not the way a customer looks at a waitress who has been slow or clumsy. He was looking at her the way certain men look at certain women when they have decided, without evidence or permission, that they know exactly what that woman is worth, and the number is not very high. Sweetheart, he said, and the word landed like something thrown. Do you actually understand what I'm paying for at this table? Because I'm not sure you do. The couple at the next table had gone very still. Arya heard the shift in ambient noise, the slight drop that happens in rooms when people begin listening without wanting to be seen doing so. I do, she said. I'll check on your table in a few minutes. She turned to leave. His hand closed around her wrist. It wasn't a grab, exactly. It was the casual grip of someone who had never needed to ask permission to stop another person from moving. The fingers were thick and dry, and they closed around the bones of her wrist like the matter was already settled. I'm talking to you, he said. Later, when she would try to explain what happened in the next 3 seconds, she would struggle. Not because she didn't remember. She remembered everything, the way she always remembered everything in those moments, with a terrible crystalline clarity. But because the sequence was difficult to translate into civilian language. There was no decision. That was the part that kept her awake afterward. There was no pause, no internal debate, no moment where the Marine in her checked in with the waitress. The training didn't consult her. It simply arrived, fully formed, the way it had been designed to. Her wrist rotated. Her elbow found the leverage it needed. Her free hand located the precise anatomical point along the inside of his forearm where the correct application of pressure produces involuntary muscle release, and in the fraction of a second between one heartbeat and the next, Gerald Holt's grip dissolved and his center of gravity lurched forward and down, and he was on the floor, not hurt. She had been precise about that, even without meaning to be. No broken bones, no serious damage. He was on the carpet of Rosario's restaurant at 9:21 on a Friday night, looking up at the amber lighting with the expression of a man whose map of the world had just been revised. The room was completely silent. Arya stood with her weight distributed evenly between both feet, her breathing still controlled, the order pad still in her other hand. She was aware of every person in the room, the way she had once been aware of every doorway and rooftop in a city where doorways and rooftops were the difference between going home and not going home. Then sound came back in a flood. Chairs scraping, voices overlapping, Claudette appearing at her elbow, saying her name very quietly and very urgently. Arya looked down at Gerald Holt. He had not yet moved. The cold understanding of what she had just done arrived with the slowness of floodwater, thorough and rising. She set the order pad on the nearest table, walked back through the kitchen, pushed through the service door into the rain. She stood in the alley, back against the brick, and let the downpour hit her face. The water was cold. The pressure behind her sternum had not gone anywhere. If anything, it had weight now. The specific heaviness of a woman who has just watched 4 years of careful invisibility evaporate in 3 seconds. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her apron pocket and looked at the screen without really seeing it. The call was from St. Vincent's Medical Center, the billing department this time, not the nursing staff. She let it go to voicemail. She already knew what it said. She had been knowing what it said for 11 months. Her brother's name was Danny. He was 26 years old, and he had been in rehabilitation since the car accident that killed his girlfriend and removed the functional use of his left leg. The surgery costs alone had amounted to a number that Arya had initially refused to say out loud because saying it out loud made it real. Danny didn't know the full extent of what it was costing her. She had made sure of that. Keeping things from Danny, protecting him from the weight of the numbers, was one of the last remaining things she could do for him that felt like love rather than logistics. She stood in the rain for a while. Then she went back inside and collected her things. Marco, the restaurant manager, was waiting near the coat hooks. He was a small man with kind eyes who had the specific misfortune of being a genuinely decent person in a business that did not especially reward decency. He looked at Arya the way a person looks when they are about to say something they don't want to say. "Arya." "I know," she said. "The man is threatening to press charges. His lawyer is already—" "I know, Marco. I vouched for you when I hired you. I need you to understand that this puts me in a very— I understand." She pulled her jacket on, checked her pockets, looked at him. "He grabbed my wrist, Marco." Marco's jaw tightened. He looked at the floor. "I know he did." "You saw it." "I saw it." Neither of them said anything for a moment. "I'm sorry," Marco said finally, and she believed him. "I truly am." She nodded. She walked out. The rain had not let up. She had 3 blocks to walk to the subway, no umbrella, and approximately $63 in her checking account. In the morning, she would call the legal aid office and spend 40 minutes on hold before being told they couldn't take her case until next quarter. She would call 3 other restaurants and leave messages that would not be returned, because word in the restaurant industry travels in ways that have nothing to do with justice and everything to do with convenience. She would sit at her kitchen table with Danny's medical bills spread in front of her and do the arithmetic that always produced the same answer. Not enough. Not even close. But that was tomorrow. Tonight she walked through the rain with her shoulders back and her eyes forward, a habit so deeply engraved she no longer recognized it as a habit. And she did not cry, because she had learned a long time ago that crying in the rain was something you only did when you still believed someone might see you. She didn't look back at Rosario's until she reached the corner. When she did, she stopped. Through the rain-streaked window, in the warm amber light of the dining room that no longer had any use for her, she could see the table where Gerald Holt had been sitting. He was upright now, gesturing at his lawyer, his composure reconstructed around whatever story he had already decided to tell about what had happened. But that wasn't what stopped her. What stopped her was the man at the corner table, still seated. Everyone else in the restaurant had gathered or scattered or pulled out their phones. This man had done none of those things. He was sitting exactly as he had been sitting before. Suit the color of charcoal, posture that seemed to require no maintenance whatsoever, a glass of red wine untouched beside his right hand. He was looking directly at Arya through the window, not with the expression of a man watching a scene, with the expression of a man who had already finished watching and moved on to thinking. She had seen that expression before. It belonged to people who were always calculating something. The question was what? After a moment, he reached into his jacket pocket, produced a card, set it on the table with one finger, slid it to the edge, looked back at her. Then he picked up his wine, turned away, and the connection broke. Arya stood in the rain. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The card sat on the edge of the table inside, small and white under the amber light. She should keep walking. Every functioning part of her brain that was not currently being drowned out by $63 and Danny's medical bills and 4 years of careful invisibility told her to keep walking. Her feet were already moving toward the door. She was back inside the restaurant before she'd made the conscious decision to go, weaving through the still unsettled crowd, ignoring the looks and the whispers, crossing to the corner table where the man sat with his wine as though the last 20 minutes had been entirely unremarkable. She picked up the card. No company name, no title, just a name. Adrian Volkov, in clean, unornamented type, and a number. When she looked up, He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, and that fact alone made her skin tighten. She could read most expressions. "That was disciplined," he said. His voice was quiet, accented. Eastern European, she thought, though it had been softened by what sounded like decades of American English layered over the top. Most people with that level of training lose the restraint when the adrenaline hits. You didn't. She looked at him. "What do you want?" A small pause. Not the pause of a man searching for words, but the pause of a man deciding which true thing to say. "I want to offer you something," he said, "but not here and not tonight. When you're ready, if you decide you're ready, that number will reach me." He looked back at his wine. Arya stood at the corner table of a restaurant that had just fired her, holding a card from a man who had watched her put a person on the floor and whose first word to her had been disciplined, and she understood with the precision of a woman whose instincts had kept her alive in places that made Manhattan in a rainstorm look like a children's story, that something had just shifted. She just didn't know yet whether it had shifted towards something better or towards something worse. She pocketed the card, walked back out into the rain. Her phone buzzed again. St. Vincent's Billing Department, second attempt. She answered it this time. By the time she reached the subway, the number they gave her had joined the others in the back of her skull, patient, heavy, and growing, and she stood on the platform in her soaked jacket with Gerald Holt's grip still ghosted around her wrist bones and a stranger's business card against her ribs. And she thought about Danny, and she thought about $63, and she thought about the man who had used the word disciplined the way most people use the word rare. The train came screaming out of the dark. She got on. The card was still in her pocket when she reached her stop. Still there when she climbed the stairs and walked 2 blocks to the building where she rented a room that she had made as clean and sparse as a barracks, because that was the only kind of home she'd ever known how to make. She unlocked the door, hit the light switch. The apartment was exactly as she had left it, except for one thing. The third drawer of her kitchen dresser was open, just slightly, an inch, maybe 2. She closed it every time she left the apartment. She had been closing it every time she left the apartment for 4 years, without exception, the same way she checked the window locks and confirmed the deadbolt. It was not a quirk, it was discipline. Arya stood in the doorway of her own home with her keys in her hand and felt the temperature of the room shift without the temperature of the room actually changing. Someone had been here. Arya did not move from the doorway for 11 seconds. She counted them the way she had been trained to count, not with panic, but with the cold, methodical calm of someone who understands that the seconds immediately following a threat assessment are the most important seconds in any sequence. Her keys were still in her right hand. Her left hand had already found the wall switch, cutting the overhead light without conscious instruction. The apartment went dark. She waited. The refrigerator hummed. A truck passed on the street below, throwing a wash of headlights across the ceiling. Nothing else moved. She cleared the apartment the way she had cleared rooms in buildings that no longer exist in cities she was not supposed to name. One hand along the wall, weight distributed low, each doorway treated as a potential problem until it proved otherwise. The bathroom. Empty. The closet behind the bathroom. Empty. The narrow space between the bed frame and the window that looked out onto the alley. Empty. She came back to the kitchen. The third drawer was open exactly as she had found it. She crouched and looked at it without touching it. Examined the wooden surface of the drawer front, the interior contents. Her spare charger, a dead flashlight, 3 rubber bands, a folded piece of paper she used to track Danny's appointment schedule. Nothing missing. Nothing added. Nothing disturbed except for the fact of the drawer itself, which was the point. This wasn't a robbery. A robbery would have been more merciful. A robbery had an explanation and a police report and an insurance form and an end. This was a message. She stood up, went to the window, looked down at the alley below, empty, puddled with rain, the same dumpster and the same broken fire escape ladder she had been meaning to report to the super for 8 months. No one. If whoever had been here was still watching, they were doing it from far enough away that it didn't matter. She stepped back from the window, sat down on the edge of her bed, still in her wet jacket, and pressed both palms flat against her thighs and breathed. The card was in her pocket. She could feel it through the denim, its small, solid weight, the corners slightly damp from the rain. Adrian Volkov. a name she had been carrying for approximately 90 minutes and that had already become, without her permission, something she was not quite able to put down. She pulled out her phone. It was 10:48 p.m. She looked at the number on the card for a long time. Then she looked at the open drawer. Then she opened her banking app and looked at the balance of $63 until it stopped looking like a number and started looking like a verdict. She put the phone down. Did not call the number. Not tonight. Tonight she pushed the kitchen chair under the door handle, checked every lock, lay down on top of the bed covers still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until somewhere around 2 in the morning her body decided it was done. Arguing with her and went to sleep. She did not sleep well. She didn't expect to. The morning arrived the way bad mornings always arrive. Too bright, too loud, and with immediate demands. She was on the phone with the legal aid office by 8:50 a.m. 47 minutes on hold. When someone finally answered, the woman on the other end spoke with the exhausted efficiency of someone handling their 30-second call of the morning and told Arya that assault and battery claims, even defensive ones, fell outside their current intake capacity until the following quarter. Arya thanked her, hung up, and sat with that for a moment. Then she called 2 restaurants, left messages, called a third. The woman who answered put her on hold, came back, and told her they weren't hiring. Arya had not told her name yet. She looked at the card again. Not yet, she told herself. Try one more day. She drove to St. Vincent's instead. Not to the billing department. She took the elevator to the 4th-floor rehabilitation wing, where the nurses knew her by name and where Danny was finishing his morning physical therapy session in a room with a window that looked out onto a courtyard that was almost pleasant in summer. He was on the parallel bars when she came in. His physical therapist, a compact woman named Rosa, who had the patience of someone who had chosen her profession with full understanding of what it required, was standing 2 feet away with her arms ready but not intervening, giving Danny the dignity of the attempt. His left leg trembled. His jaw was set. He did not look at his leg. He looked straight ahead at the end of the bars with the expression of a man who had made an agreement with himself about what was acceptable and what was not. He made it to the end. He gripped the rail and breathed. Then he looked up and saw Arya standing in the doorway, and his face did the complicated thing it always did. Relief and pride and something adjacent to shame, all of it cycling through in about half a second before he arranged it into a smile. "You're early," he said. "I had a free morning." He knew her well enough to know that meant something. He didn't ask yet. Rosa helped him to the chair, gave Arya a small nod that communicated several things simultaneously. "He's making progress. It's slower than we hoped. We need to talk about the next billing cycle," and stepped out to give them privacy. Danny looked at her properly now. He had their mother's eyes and their father's jaw and the particular wariness of a younger sibling who had spent a lifetime watching an older one absorb impact so he wouldn't have to. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing serious." "Arya." "A thing at work. I handled it." "You handled it." He repeated the words the way people repeat things when the words are clearly doing a lot of heavy lifting for something much larger. "What does that mean?" She sat down in the chair across from him and looked at his left leg, and then looked away because looking at it still did something to her chest that she had not managed to neutralize after 11 months of trying. "It means I don't work at Rosario's anymore." Silence. "They fired you." "It's complicated." "Was it—" He stopped, started again more carefully. "Did someone—" "A customer put his hands on me. I responded. They had to let me go." Danny closed his eyes, opened them. His hands, resting on the chair arms, were very still. The stillness of a man who wanted to hit something and had nowhere to put that want. "Are you okay?" "Yes." "That's not a question you're allowed to answer in one word." "I'm fine, Danny, honestly." "Don't say honestly. You only say honestly when you're lying." She almost smiled. Almost. "I have some savings. It gives me time to find something else. Don't worry about the bills." He looked at her for a long moment with the clarity that people develop when they've been lying in hospital beds for most of a year with nothing to do but think. "How much savings?" "Enough." Enough is not a number. It's enough for now. The silence that followed had texture to it. Danny looked out the window at the courtyard. A pigeon was working at something on the pavement below with single-minded dedication. "I hate this," he said quietly. Not the situation specifically, everything, the whole architecture of it, the chair, the bills, the look on his sister's face that she was working so hard to keep neutral. I know. You shouldn't be. He stopped himself again, pressed his lips together. I should be helping you. I should be. Stop. Arya, stop. Her voice was flat but not cold. You're doing your work. That's the job right now. That's the only job. Everything else is my problem. He didn't argue. That was worse somehow than if he had. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked about other things, a television series he'd been watching, a book Rosa had recommended, the pigeon in the courtyard that apparently came every morning. By the time she left, she had successfully performed the version of herself that had everything under control, and she was very tired from it. In the elevator going down, she took out the card. She called the number before she reached the ground floor. It rang twice. Then, Volkov, just the name. No greeting. The voice was exactly as she remembered it, quiet, accented, with the kind of economy that comes from decades of saying things only once. This is Arya Mercer, she said, from the restaurant last night. A brief pause. I know who you are. I want to know what you're offering. Not on the phone. Then tell me enough that I'm not walking blind into whatever this is. Another pause. Longer this time, and she got the sense it was not because he was uncertain, but because he was deciding what she had earned. I run several organizations, he said. Legitimate businesses operating in environments where the legal system provides incomplete protection. I need people with specific capabilities to maintain order and protect interests. I do not offer charity. I offer compensation proportional to competence. Your competence is evident. How do you know my competence? You watched me put someone on the floor for about 3 seconds. I've watched you longer than 3 seconds. A beat. I know you served 2 tours. I know your discharge was honorable. I know your brother's rehabilitation costs and the current state of your finances. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Arya did not walk out. You looked into me, she said. I look into everyone I consider. Before or after last night? After. I'm thorough and I'm fast. No apology in his voice. No defensiveness either. Just the tone of a man presenting facts that he considered relevant and expected the other party to evaluate honestly. I'm not trying to alarm you. I'm trying to demonstrate that I don't make offers carelessly. She stepped out of the elevator, crossed the lobby to a corner near the window where she could see the entrance and the street simultaneously and where the nearest person was 10 feet away. Habit. What does the meeting look like? She said. Coffee. Public location of your choosing. 1 hour. You can walk away at any point. And if I decide after the coffee that I'm not interested, then I wish you well and you don't hear from me again. She looked out at the street, the morning traffic, the pedestrians with their umbrellas from last night's rain still in hand, the ordinary grinding machinery of a city that did not particularly care what happened to Arya Mercer. Tomorrow, she said. 10 o'clock? There's a diner on Chambers Street called Pellegrino's, corner booth. I'll be there. She hung up. She stood at the hospital lobby window for a moment. Then she walked outside into the gray morning and told herself she was simply gathering information, that she had made no decisions, that tomorrow was just coffee, and she could walk away. She was not entirely sure she believed that, but it was something to hold on to. Pellegrino's on Chambers Street had the particular quality of a diner that had survived decades of Manhattan real estate pressure through a combination of stubborn ownership and food reliable enough that people came back without thinking too hard about why. The corner booth had a sight line to both the entrance and the kitchen door. She had chosen it for that reason, and she arrived 15 minutes early and ordered black coffee and sat with her hands around the mug and waited. Adrian Volkov arrived at exactly 10 o'clock, which told her something. Not early. Early was its own kind of performance. Not late. Late was a power play. Exactly on time was the choice of someone who considered punctuality a form of respect rather than a strategy. He was less striking in daylight than he had seemed through the rain-streaked window of Rosario's. Somewhere in his mid-40s, the charcoal suit had been replaced by something darker and less formal, though it still sat on him with the particular precision of clothes that had been made for a specific body. His face was harder in morning light, not unfriendly, but not warm either. The face of a man who had trained himself to reveal only what he intended to reveal. He sat down across from her, looked at her coffee, signaled the waitress without dramatic gesture, ordered the same. "You chose well," he said, glancing around the diner. "I live nearby." "I know." "Right." She put both hands on the table. "Let's establish something. The part where you demonstrate how much you know about me. We can skip that. I understand you did your research. I don't need the tour." The corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "Fair. So talk to me about what you actually want." He folded his hands around his coffee mug when it arrived. The same posture she'd used, she noticed, though on him it looked entirely unself-conscious. "I have 4 primary business operations," he said. 2 import-export companies, 1 real estate development firm, and a private security consultancy. All of them are legal. All of them generate legitimate revenue. All of them operate in environments where certain parties, competitors, criminal enterprises, individuals with specific grievances, periodically attempt to interfere through means that law enforcement cannot address fast enough or completely enough to be useful. Tss. "So you need enforcers. I need protectors. The distinction matters." His voice didn't sharpen, but something in his eyes did. "My people do not initiate violence. They do not intimidate. They do not operate outside the law except in situations where the law has already failed to protect what it should protect. They respond. They contain. They document. And when the situation calls for it, they neutralize threats with the minimum force necessary." "And what does neutralize mean in your vocabulary?" "Exactly what it means in yours. You had a man twice your size gripping your wrist last night. You could have broken 3 bones in his arm without additional effort. You chose not to. That choice took more discipline than the technique itself." Arya said nothing. "I'm not looking for someone who wants to hurt people," Adrian continued. "I have enough of those. I'm looking for someone who doesn't." She looked at him. He was meeting her eyes with the steadiness of a person who was accustomed to being studied and had long since stopped being unsettled by it. "You mentioned my brother's medical bills," she said. "I did." "What does that mean in practical terms for the offer?" He named a salary. Then he named a signing bonus, calmly and without apparent awareness of what the number meant to a woman with $63 in her checking account, though she was entirely certain he was aware. He talked about benefits, health coverage that was comprehensive in the specific ways that St. Vincent's rehabilitation wing required. He talked about the role itself, the team, the organizational structure, the expectations. She listened. She asked precise questions. He gave precise answers, no evasions, no theater. If he was lying, he was the most controlled liar she had ever sat across from, and she had sat across from some exceptional liars in her life. When he finished, she said, "Who else knows you're making this offer?" A fractional pause. "The relevant members of my leadership team." "Were any of them against it?" He looked at her steadily. "1. Name." "Damian Cross. Senior operative. He believes the position should have gone to someone internal. And you overruled him." "I make my own hiring decisions." "Is he the kind of person who accepts being overruled?" Adrian's expression did not change, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness, the same kind of shift she had noticed in certain commanding officers when they were assessing a question rather than simply answering it. That's a perceptive question for a first meeting. "I'm perceptive." "Is he?" Damian Cross is talented, experienced, and deeply invested in hierarchies that benefit him. He accepts decisions made above him because the organization's structure requires it. He paused. He may not accept them gracefully. "I need to know that going in." "Now you know it." She turned her coffee mug a quarter turn, looked at the entrance, looked back at him. "I want to talk to someone currently working for you before I decide, not a reference you provide. Someone I choose after you give me the roster." His eyebrows moved, the first purely spontaneous expression she had seen from him. "That's an unusual condition." "That's my condition." He considered it. "I'll give you 3 names. You pick one." "2 conditions," she said, "and the second one is this. I need to understand clearly, before I commit to anything, where your lines are. What you won't do. Because if I take this and I find out later there's a category of activity I didn't know about, I won't give notice. I'll just be gone. And I'll take what I know with me." The diner hummed around them. Somewhere behind the counter, a plate hit a surface too hard, and someone swore quietly in Spanish. Adrian Volkov looked at Arya Mercer across the corner booth of a Chambers Street diner on a gray Tuesday morning and said, "Children are never targeted. Uninvolved parties are never used as leverage. Any operation that requires harming someone who hasn't chosen to be in this world is something I will not sanction. Those are not negotiable, and they have never been violated in 12 years of operation." He paused. "Is that the kind of answer you're asking for?" "Yes," she said. "Then I'll get you the 3 names today." He reached into his jacket, set a folded document on the table. "Employment agreement, standard terms, plus the specifics we discussed. Take it. Have a lawyer look at it if you want. I'm not rushing you." She picked it up, folded it into her jacket pocket without reading it, which she understood was its own kind of signal and which she was comfortable sending. She left the diner first. He made no move to stop her or walk with her, which she appreciated. She was 2 blocks away when her phone rang. Unknown number. Not the billing department's recorded cadence, not Danny's ringtone. She almost didn't answer. She answered. Silence for a moment. Then a voice she didn't recognize. Male, smooth, with an edge underneath the smoothness, like a blade wrapped in cloth. "You had coffee with the wrong person this morning," the voice said. Arya stopped walking. People moved around her on the sidewalk, unaware. "Who is this?" "Someone who's trying to save you some trouble." A pause, timed for effect. She recognized the technique. Volkov's operation has a problem, a significant one. And the people who have that problem are going to solve it very soon. Anyone standing next to him when that happens is going to have a very bad time. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will." Another pause. "Walk away while you still can. This is the only call you get." The line went dead. Arya stood on the sidewalk with the phone pressed against her ear and the city moving around her in its enormous, indifferent way, and she looked back in the direction of the diner she had just left. And she understood that she had crossed some kind of threshold without knowing it, and that someone had been watching her cross it, which meant they had been watching the diner, which meant they had been watching Adrian Volkov, which meant whatever he had told her about the people who wanted to interfere with his operation was not a theoretical problem. It was already in motion. She looked at the employment agreement folded in her pocket. She had not signed it. She had no obligation. She could keep walking, find another restaurant, find another way to manage the bills, tell Danny the numbers were fine, keep her head down, and her life small and manageable and safe. She pulled out her phone and called the number Adrian had used that morning. He answered on the first ring. "Someone just called me," she said. "Unknown number. They told me to walk away from you." A silence that lasted exactly long enough to confirm that this was not new information to him, that somewhere in his calculations this possibility had been accounted for. "Are you walking away?" he said. She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. "No," she said, "but I need everything. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight you tell me exactly what I'm walking into, and you don't leave anything out. Because if I find out later there was something you held back, I will make whatever these people are planning look like a minor inconvenience." The pause that followed was different from his previous pauses. This one had something in it she hadn't heard from him before. "Come to this address at 7, he said, and gave it to her. She memorized it, hung up. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer, and then she started walking. Not away, not back toward the diner, but forward, which in that moment felt like the most dangerous direction she had chosen since the last time she climbed into a vehicle in a city where the roads were not safe and drove anyway, because the alternative was to stop moving, and stopping was the one thing she had never known how to do. Her phone buzzed. A text from St. Vincent's billing department, automated this time, the kind that arrived when an account crossed a threshold. She looked at the number, put the phone back in her pocket without responding. When she reached the address that evening, a building in Tribeca, glass and steel, the kind that existed in the city's economy as a statement rather than a structure. The lobby security knew her name before she said it. That should have been the moment she turned around. It wasn't. The elevator opened on the 14th floor, and she stepped into a room where 4 people were already seated around a table, and every one of them turned to look at her when she walked in, and the one closest to the door, a man with a jaw like a clenched fist and pale eyes that assessed her with the warmth of a tax audit, did not stand, did not extend a hand, did not acknowledge her entrance with anything except the absolute minimum of attention that common courtesy required. Adrian was at the head of the table. He nodded once. "Everyone, this is Aria Mercer. She'll be joining us." The man with the pale eyes said nothing, but his jaw shifted slightly and his eyes moved from Aria to Adrian with an expression that said, with perfect clarity and without a single word, that this was not over. She had been in the room for less than 30 seconds, and she had already made an enemy. She pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, and looked at the document in the center of the table, and understood, reading the first paragraph, that what Adrian Volkov had brought her into was not simply a protection operation. Someone inside this room had already begun selling them out. The document in the center of the table was 43 pages long and had the dry, precise language of something written by lawyers who understood that every word was a potential liability. Aria had read enough military contracts and operational briefs to move through it quickly, skimming the sections that were standard and slowing at the sections that were not. The others around the table were watching her read, which she was aware of and which she allowed, because being watched while reading was information too. It told her who was impatient, who was indifferent, and who was calculating. Damien Cross was calculating. He sat across from her with his forearms on the table and his pale eyes moving between her face and the document with the steady, rhythmic attention of a man taking inventory. He was somewhere in his late 30s, built like someone who had never stopped training for something, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been clenched for so long it had simply set that way permanently. He had not introduced himself. He had not acknowledged her entrance beyond the minimal, grudging shift of attention that social mechanics required. Everything about him communicated the same thing in slightly different registers, that her presence at this table was a problem he had not agreed to and had not finished deciding how to address. The other three people at the table were easier. On Adrian's left sat a woman named Elena Vasquez, 50s, compact, with close-cropped gray hair, and the particular stillness of someone who had made peace with the fact that most conversations were a waste of time. She'd given Aria a single nod when Adrian introduced her, and had gone back to the papers in front of her. Beside Elena was a man named Garrett, no last name offered, who had the weathered, slightly removed quality of someone who had spent significant time in places that did not appear on tourist maps. And at the far end of the table, a younger man named Phil, who handled what Adrian called the technical infrastructure of the organization, and who had the distracted energy of someone whose mind was always partially somewhere else. Adrian was at the head. He let Aria finish reading before he spoke. "What you have in front of you is an overview of current operations and the threat landscape," he said. 3 weeks ago, a piece of proprietary information about a scheduled shipment, legitimate cargo, medical equipment, bound for a distribution partner in the Balkans, was passed to a competing organization. The shipment was intercepted. We lost $400,000 in product, and, more importantly, we lost a relationship with a partner we had spent 7 years building. Aria set the document down. "How do you know it was passed internally?" "Because the shipment details were distributed to 6 people, Elena said, without looking up. "And none of those 6 people are in contact with the competing organization through any channel we can identify." She paused. "Except through the channels we haven't found yet. So you have a leak you can't locate." "We have a leak we have strong suspicions about," Adrian said, "that we cannot yet prove." Aria looked at him, then at Damien. Damien was looking at the table. "And the competing organization," she said, "the one that intercepted the shipment. What are they?" "Rayner Group," Garrett said. It was the first time he'd spoken, and his voice had the flat quality of someone describing something unpleasant with deliberate clinical detachment. "Victor Rayner. He's been operating in the import-export space in parallel to Adrian's organizations for about 6 years. He's been trying to absorb or eliminate Adrian's business interests for the last 2. He's not subtle and he's not patient." "Is he violent?" "He prefers financial pressure. But when financial pressure doesn't work, yes." Aria processed this. She looked at the document again, at the financial summary on page 12. The numbers were significant. "You mentioned someone called me today, a warning to walk away from this." "That call came from a number registered to a shell company linked to Rayner's network," Phil said. He had his laptop open and was typing as he talked. "We traced it inside 90 minutes of you reporting it. So they already know about me." "They knew about the meeting at Pellegrino's," Adrian said. "Which means they have eyes on my movements, which is not new." He paused. What is new is that they made contact with you directly. That's an escalation. Or a test, Elena said quietly, to see if she'd report it. I reported it, Arya said. Yes. Elena looked at her for the first time with something that was not quite approval, but was adjacent to it. You did. Damien Cross moved, just slightly, shifted his weight back in his chair with the controlled deliberateness of a man who wanted to say something and had decided provisionally not to. His jaw worked once. I want to be direct, Damien said. His voice was smooth in the way that sharp things are sometimes smooth. The quality you notice right before contact. This organization has a trust problem. We have a leak and we don't know where it is. Introducing an unknown quantity at this moment. He gestured toward Arya with 2 fingers, the absolute minimum of acknowledgement, is not a strategic decision. It's a liability. The room was quiet. Arya looked at him. Is that for me or for Adrian? It's for the room. The room seems to disagree with you. The room hasn't voted. Damien. Adrian's voice was mild, which seemed to cost him nothing and communicate everything. The decision has been made. I'm aware of that. Damien's eyes moved to Adrian and held there. I'm also aware that the last 3 decisions made unilaterally resulted in the situation on page 12. He tapped the document once. I'm noting my position for the record. Your position is noted, Adrian said. It has been noted. We're moving forward. Something passed through Damien's face, too fast and too controlled to fully name. He nodded once, picked up his water glass, drank. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. By the end of it, Arya had a functional understanding of the organization's structure, its current vulnerabilities, its financial pressure points, and the specific timeline of events that had led to where they were sitting tonight. She had also developed a working read on every person in the room, which was a habit so old she no longer recognized it as effort. Elena was competent and honest and slightly terrified, though she hid it under efficiency. Garrett had seen worse than this and was managing accordingly. Phil was smart, but lived in the abstract and would be useless in anything that required physical presence. And Damien Cross was the most dangerous person in the room, not because of his size or his obvious capability, but because he believed he was right and had the patience to act on that belief slowly. She signed the employment agreement before she left. She told herself it was because of Danny's medical bills. That was true. It was not the whole truth, but it was true enough to function as a reason, and sometimes a reason that was true enough was sufficient. She started the following Monday. The first 2 weeks were an education in the specific texture of an organization that operated in the space between legitimate and illegitimate without fully belonging to either. The offices were clean and quietly expensive, the kind of space that communicated serious money without announcing it. The people were professional. The work had its own logic: protective logistics, threat assessment, coordination of security protocols for shipments and meetings, and the movements of people who had made enough success in enough dangerous fields to require protection. Arya was good at it. She had not expected to be surprised by that. She had known her skill set translated, but the degree to which the work fit her was something she had not anticipated. She worked fast. She noticed things. She asked questions that cut to the relevant point without detour, which Elena, who became something like a cautious ally over the first week, told her was unusual. Most new people spend a month performing competence, Elena said one afternoon over bad coffee in the break room. You're just competent. It's disconcerting. Good disconcerting or bad disconcerting? Ask me again in 2 weeks. What Arya had not anticipated was Damien. He did not confront her. He did not create incidents. He was, in every observable way, professionally civil, acknowledging her when acknowledgement was required, deferring to the organizational hierarchy in front of others, contributing to joint briefings with the cold, excellent precision of someone who was very good at his job and had no intention of letting personal grievance affect his performance. But she felt him. The way you feel a change in air pressure before weather arrives. In meetings, his eyes came to her at specific moments. Not the moments when she was speaking, but the moments just after, as though he was logging her words separately from hearing them. In the corridor, when they passed, there was a fraction of a second in his acknowledgement that was precisely calibrated to communicate that she existed in his awareness as a problem, not a colleague. She kept her door, literally and metaphorically, closed. On the 12th day, she found the first piece. She had been reviewing security logs from the week preceding the intercepted shipment, a task that had been assigned to her because she was new, and because new people were given the work that the existing team had already stared at too long to see clearly. She was looking for communication anomalies, the kind that appeared as normal traffic but had irregular timing or destination patterns. Phil had built a program that flagged candidates. There were 47 flags across a 10-day window. She worked through them in order. Flag 31 was a file transfer that had gone out through a secondary administrative account at 2:47 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 days before the shipment. The file itself had been deleted, but the metadata remained: timestamp, file size, destination server. The destination server was registered in Latvia, which meant nothing on its own, but the timing did. 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. She cross-referenced the building's access logs. One person had badged into the office between 2 and 3 a.m. on that Tuesday. The name on the badge record was her own. Arya sat very still in front of her computer screen. The fluorescent light of the small office she had been given hummed above her. The building around her was quiet. It was after 7 in the evening, and most people had gone. She read the badge record 3 times, with the concentrated mechanical patience of someone checking a map against terrain that does not match. Her badge. Her name. 2:47 a.m., the Tuesday before the shipment was intercepted. A file transfer from a secondary account that had subsequently been wiped. She had not been in the building at 2:47 on a Tuesday. She had not been issued her badge until the previous Friday. Her first day had been Monday. Her badge had been created on Friday in HR processing, which meant it had existed in the system for 4 days before she had physically used it. 4 days during which someone else could have cloned it. She closed the log file, opened Phil's flagging program, pulled up the metadata on the secondary account that had made the transfer. The account had been created 11 days ago, 5 days before her start date, under a name that was not a real name, but that used her employee ID number as the account identifier. Someone had built a ghost account using her ID before she had ever walked through the front door. She sat with that for a moment, feeling the architecture of it, the patience it required, the advanced planning, the specific knowledge of when she would be starting and what her employee ID would be. That level of inside knowledge had a limited number of sources. She thought of Damian Cross, who had objected to her hiring before she arrived. She thought of the anonymous call she had received the morning after coffee with Adrian. She thought of her apartment drawer open by 1 inch, with nothing missing and nothing added. This had not started on her first day. This had started before she arrived. Someone had been building a frame around her before she had agreed to walk into it, which meant the frame was not a response to her presence. It was the reason for her presence. She had been hired to be blamed. The understanding arrived without drama, which was the worst kind. The kind that settled into the body rather than hitting it, cold and thorough, like floodwater finding every low point. She copied the relevant files to an encrypted drive she kept in her jacket pocket. She closed every window on her computer. She sat for another 30 seconds, breathing evenly, looking at the blank screen. Then she went to find Adrian. His office was on the 14th floor, the room she had not seen the inside of yet, though she had passed the door twice daily. The assistant was gone for the evening. She knocked. "Come in." He was at his desk with his jacket off, papers spread around him in the organized chaos of someone who processed information better when it had physical form. He looked up, read her face, set down his pen. "Sit down." "I'll stand." She put the encrypted drive on his desk. "Plug that in." He did, without asking questions. She walked him through the files. He went through them twice, with the same concentrated patience he applied to everything, and the room was very quiet while he did. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at her. "How did you find this?" "I looked at the right flag in the right order. Anyone would have found it eventually." "My people have been looking at those logs for 3 weeks." "Your people were looking for an outsider. The metadata is structured to look like insider activity." She paused. "It's specifically structured to look like me." "Yes?" He said it calmly, and she felt the calm as a controlled thing, the kind that requires maintenance. "You knew," she said. A pause. "I suspected." "That's not the same as telling me before I walked in." "No." He looked at her steadily. "It's not." The anger arrived then, Not explosive, because she did not do explosive, but thorough, the way a current is thorough, filling every available space. You brought me in knowing someone might try to use me as a fall guy. You let me sign an employment agreement and badge into this building, and you did not tell me that my ID had potentially already been compromised before I arrived. I didn't know the frame had already been built. I suspected the attempt would come. I didn't know the timing. That distinction matters less than you seem to think. Arya, how did someone know my employee ID before my first day? The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from any she had heard from him before. Not the silence of a man choosing which true thing to say. The silence of a man arriving at a threshold he had been avoiding. HR processes new hires through a shared administrative system, he said. Employee IDs are assigned automatically when the file is created. The file for your hire was created the day after I made the decision to bring you on. He paused. The system is accessible to senior operatives. Senior operatives, she looked at him, like Damian Cross. I want evidence before I take action against someone who has been with this organization for 7 years. You have evidence. It's on that drive. The account was created using your ID. It does not have Damian's fingerprints on it. Then find his fingerprints. Her voice was flat and precise and carried no heat, which was more frightening, she had learned over the years, than volume. Or tell me where to look and I'll find them. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the encrypted drive and looked at it the way people look at things that have simplified and complicated their lives simultaneously. I need you to do something difficult, he said. Tell me. I need you to go back to your office, continue working. Do not indicate that you found this. Do not change your routine in any way that Damian might read as a signal. She stared at him. You want me to sit on this? I want you to give me 48 hours to build the complete picture before we move. If we confront him now, he destroys whatever else he has and we lose the ability to understand the full scope of what he's given to Raynor. And in 48 hours, while I'm sitting on it, he's potentially building more of the frame. Yes. So I'm the bait. You're already the bait. That happened before either of us could prevent it. What I'm asking now is whether you're willing to be the bait deliberately, with full knowledge, rather than accidentally. The fluorescent light of his office was the same quality as the one in her smaller office below, and she thought for a completely irrational second about the fluorescent lights in the rehabilitation wing at St. Vincent's, the ones above Danny's parallel bars, and the way he had looked at the end of those bars without looking at his leg, with the expression of a man who had made a private agreement about what was acceptable. She understood something about private agreements. 48 hours, she said. And I want everything. Every piece of intelligence you have on Raynor, on Damian, on the intercepted shipment. Everything. You'll have it tonight. And if Damian moves against me in those 48 hours, then we move immediately, regardless of how complete the picture is. She picked up the encrypted drive from his desk, pocketed it, turned to leave. Arya. His voice stopped her at the door. I am sorry for the way this began. She considered several responses, settled on the most accurate. Be sorry after. Right now, just fix it. She went back to her office, sat down, opened the log files again and stared at them with the expression of someone doing ordinary work, which was the most important performance she had currently available to her. At 9:17 that evening, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, different from the one that had called her outside St. Vincent's, but the same absence of identifying information, the same deliberate blankness. The text said, Your brother's next appointment is Thursday at 2 p.m. St. Vincent's 4th floor. It would be a shame if someone were waiting there instead of you. Arya read the text 3 times. Her hands were completely still. Her breathing was even. The office was quiet around her, and the city outside the window was lit up in its usual indifferent brilliance, and she sat in the specific silence of a woman who has just understood that the threat has moved from professional to personal, and that the 48 hours she had agreed to give Adrian had just become a luxury she could no longer afford, and that the version of herself she had been carefully constructing for 4 years, the one that stayed invisible, stayed small, stayed controlled, was going to have to be set aside, because whatever came next was going to require something older and considerably less careful. She put the phone down on the desk, looked at it, picked it back up and called the number back. It was disconnected. She sat for 10 more seconds. Then she stood, put on her jacket, pocketed the encrypted drive, and walked out of the office and down the corridor toward the elevator. She passed Damien Cross's office on the way. The light under his door was on. She stopped, stood in the corridor outside his closed door for 3 full seconds, looking at the line of light along the floor, feeling the weight of 48 hours against the weight of a text message about her brother. And she made the calculation that the two things could not coexist, that the math only worked one way, and that the version of events where she waited and trusted the process had just been made. She knocked on Damien Cross's door once, did not wait for an answer. He was at his desk with his jacket on, unusual for 9:30 at night, the kind of detail that registered automatically. His laptop was open. His phone was face down on the desk surface, which people did when they had recently used it or were about to. He looked up when she came in, and his expression cycled through surprise and landed on the careful blankness of someone who had been expecting something without knowing its exact shape. Mercer. Not a greeting. A notation. She closed the door behind her, did not sit. Someone just threatened my brother. Nothing moved in his face. That was the tell. Not a flinch, not a question, not the automatic "what do you mean" that an innocent person produces when handed that sentence without context. Just the stillness of someone absorbing information they were already holding. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "Are you? What do you want from me?" "I want to know if you sent the text." His jaw set. He leaned back in his chair with the deliberate ease of someone performing relaxation. "That's a serious accusation. I didn't accuse you, I asked you a question. The answer is no." His voice was flat and clean and utterly without the quality that actual truth usually carries, the slight roughness of something that costs something to say. "I don't know what's happening with your brother, and I had nothing to do with any text message." Arya looked at him for a long moment. She had interviewed people in conditions significantly more pressured than a quiet office at 9:30 in the evening, and she had learned over years of practice that the body almost always contradicts the voice if you know what to look for. His voice was controlled, his hands were still, his eyes were steady. All of it was too coordinated, the performance of a man who had rehearsed innocence rather than simply possessing it. "Okay," she said. She left his office, walked back down the corridor, took the elevator down one floor and walked to Phil's workspace, which was technically closed for the evening, but which Phil occupied until 11 most nights because Phil did not appear to have a life outside of servers and code, a fact she had noted without judgment. Phil looked up when she came in, read her expression. His hands moved to his keyboard before she said anything. "I need the cell tower data for a text sent from an unknown number to my phone at 9:17 tonight," she said. "And I need the access log for Damien Cross's badge for the last 3 weeks." Phil opened his mouth. "I know it's not strictly my authorization level," she said. "I'm asking you to make a judgment call about what matters right now." Phil looked at her for 2 seconds. Then he turned back to his screen and started typing. He was good. Genuinely good. The kind of fast that looked unhurried. And within 4 minutes, he had the tower data on one monitor and the badge log on the other. The text was relayed through 3 proxy numbers, he said. "Final origin point is a number registered to a business in Queens. I can get the business registration in, the badge log first." He pulled it up. She leaned over his shoulder and read. Damien Cross had badged into the building at 11:40 p.m. on the Tuesday 3 weeks ago, when the file transfer had gone out at 2:47 a.m. He had badged out at 3:19 a.m. The file transfer window was 2:47 to 2:51. Damien Cross had been in the building for the entirety of it. "Print that," she said quietly. Phil printed it. She took the paper. The business registration. LDK Consulting, LLC. Registered in Queens 18 months ago. Listed director is a... Phil stopped typing for a half second, which was its own kind of signal. Listed director is a woman named Carol Fenn, but the registered agent address is the same as 3 other shell companies I'm looking at right now, and those 3 companies all appear in the financial records of... He stopped again, looked at her. Victor Rayner. The name landed in the room like a stone into still water. "So Damien used a Rayner network number to send the text," she said. "Either Damien used it, or someone used it knowing it would point at Damien." Phil looked uncomfortable. "I want to be careful about the direction of that logic." "Be careful later. Right now, print everything you have on those shell companies." He printed. She took the papers, folded them, and put them in her jacket with the encrypted drive and the badge log. She looked at Phil. "You didn't see me tonight." He turned back to his screen. "See who?" She went back up to the 14th floor. Adrian's assistant was still gone. She knocked, went in without waiting. Adrian was on the phone. He saw her face and ended the call in 4 words and set the phone down. She put the papers on his desk, watched him read. His face did not change in the dramatic way that faces change in movies. There was no widening of the eyes, no sharp intake of breath. What happened was more precise, a series of micro-adjustments, the kind that happen when a mental model is being revised against new data, small recalibrations that were visible only because she was watching for them. "The 48 hours is gone," she said. "He threatened Danny." "I understand. I need to know right now whether you're going to act on this tonight or whether I need to handle it myself." He looked up from the papers. "What does handle it yourself mean?" "It means I go to Damien's office and I ask him in a way that produces honest answers." A pause. "That's not something I can sanction." "Then tell me what you're going to do, specifically, tonight." He stood. When Adrian Volkov stood with a specific intention in his body, the room rearranged itself around him slightly. Not through size, which was not remarkable, but through the quality of his attention, which became absolute. "I'm going to call Damien up here in the next 10 minutes. You're going to be in the room. We're going to present the evidence, and we're going to watch what he does with it. And Danny? I have someone I trust going to St. Vincent's tonight. He'll be in the building until Thursday afternoon. Nothing will reach your brother." She searched his face. Found the thing she was looking for. Not comfort, not reassurance, but the specific quality of a person making a commitment they understood the weight of. 10 minutes, she said. "Go get Elena. I want a witness." Arya found Elena in the small conference room 2 doors down, working through a binder of financial documents with the focused misery of someone auditing a catastrophe. Elena took one look at Arya and closed the binder. "Now," Elena said. "Now." They were in Adrian's office when Damien arrived. He had been called up without explanation, which was not unusual enough to trigger alarm. Adrian called people without explanation regularly. It was part of how he maintained informational authority. But Damien stopped when he saw the configuration of the room. Arya standing to the left, Elena seated, Adrian behind his desk with papers in front of him that Damien could see were documents, and not simply the general scatter of late evening work. His face cycled through the same sequence as before, surprise into blankness. But this time there was something underneath the blankness, a current, like heat rising from pavement. "Close the door," Adrian said. Damien closed the door. Did not sit. Adrian laid the badge log on the desk first, then the file transfer metadata, then the shell company registration. Each document placed with the flat calm of a man laying cards he has already decided to play. Damien looked at the documents. His eyes moved across them with the speed of someone who reads quickly and understands immediately. The room was very quiet. The building's ventilation system produced a low, constant sound that Arya had stopped noticing weeks ago and was now acutely aware of again. "The badge log places you in the building during the transfer window," Adrian said. The file was sent through an account built on Arya's employee ID, an ID that was in the system 4 days before she arrived, during which time you had administrative system access. The text sent to Arya tonight threatening her brother originated from a number in the Raynor network. "I would like you to explain these things to me." Damien looked at the documents for another moment, then he looked up at Adrian. "I want a lawyer," he said. "You're not being charged with anything. You're being asked to explain evidence to the person who runs this organization." "I want a lawyer before I say anything else." "Damien." Adrian's voice had not changed in volume or temperature and somehow became more dangerous for it. 7 years. I am giving you the opportunity to talk to me directly, right now, before this reaches a point where talking to me directly is no longer an option. Damien's jaw was set to the point that the muscle along the side of his face was visibly rigid. He looked at Arya. The look was not threatening. It was worse than threatening. It was the look of a man who has completed an internal calculation and arrived at an answer he has decided to live with. "You want the truth?" he said. His voice had shed the smoothness. What was underneath was harder and rougher and in some ways more honest than anything she had heard from him. The truth is that this organization has been declining for 2 years, and Adrian has been too proud to see it. Raynor is better resourced, better connected, and more willing to make the decisions that actually keep operations viable. I didn't betray anything. I made a business decision. The room absorbed this. You gave Raynor our shipment information, Elena said. Her voice was very flat. I gave Raynor information that accelerated an outcome that was coming regardless. There was a partner relationship of 7 years on that shipment, Adrian said. People who trusted us. People who were going to be absorbed into Raynor's network within 18 months anyway. I shortened the timeline, and the frame you built around Arya. Adrian's voice finally had something in it now. Not anger, which Arya had expected, but something colder. Disappointment, she realized. The specific cold of a person who had held a belief about another person for 7 years and was watching it be surgically removed. That was your insurance policy. Damien said nothing. If the evidence was found, it would point at the new hire, the person with no history here, no established trust, no defenders. Adrian looked at him. You built that before she arrived, before she had done a single thing. It was a contingency. It was a coward's move. The words were quiet and landed like something heavy. In 7 years, I have never once questioned your courage. I'm questioning it now. Something crossed Damien's face, fast and involuntary and gone before it fully formed. And Arya recognized it as the specific pain of a man who has told himself a story about who he is and has just been handed evidence to the contrary. It was not a pain she was interested in accommodating. What about the text to my brother? She said. Damien looked at her. That wasn't me. The number traces to the Raynor network. I know it does. I said it wasn't me. His voice had a different quality now. Not defensive, but something tighter. Something that might have been alarm if she'd been charitable. If Raynor's people reached out to your brother, that was their decision. I didn't authorize that. Did you give them Danny's name? A pause. 1 second. 2. I gave them your file, your background, standard information about a new hire. The 2 seconds of his pause had contained Danny's name and his location and his Thursday appointment, and they both understood that without either of them saying it, and the specific fury that moved through Arya's chest in response, was the cleanest thing she had felt since walking into Rosario's restaurant weeks ago. Clean because it had no ambiguity. Clean because she knew exactly what it was and where it was directed. Adrian, she said without taking her eyes off Damien, I need 10 minutes with him, alone. Arya, I'm not going to hurt him. A beat. I'm going to get information that he will not give you while Elena is in the room, because the information implicates Elena. The air in the room shifted. Elena made a sound. Not a word, not yet, but the sound of someone whose footing has just changed without warning. Arya turned and looked at her steadily. The secondary admin account, the one used for the file transfer. It required 2-factor authentication to create. Badge access plus admin credential approval. Damien had the badge access. He needed an admin credential holder to approve the account creation. She paused. There are 3 admin credential holders in this organization. You, Phil, and Adrian. Phil doesn't have building access after 10 p.m. His keycard is time restricted, which I verified with Phil an hour ago without telling him why. Adrian was in Chicago on the night in question. I checked the travel logs this afternoon. Elena had gone very still. The binder of financial documents was closed in front of her and her hands were resting on top of it, and she was looking at Arya with an expression that was not guilt and was not innocence, but was the expression of someone who has reached the final room of a maze they thought was larger than this. Elena, Adrian said. His voice had changed again. Now it was simply exhausted. Tell me I'm misunderstanding this. Elena looked at him. The efficiency she wore like a second skin had not entirely left her face, but underneath it, in the lines around her mouth, and the particular set of her eyes, was something that had been there the whole time, and that Arya now recognized as fear. Not of discovery, but of the moment after discovery. The moment when you have to look at someone who trusted you and explain yourself in a language that does not have adequate words. He came to me 4 months ago, Elena said. Her voice was steady in the way that things are steady when they have already broken and the person speaking has accepted the break. Damien. He told me Rayner had made contact. He told me the organization's financial trajectory over the next 18 months. He showed me numbers that... She stopped. He showed me numbers that I had already been looking at privately and reaching the same conclusions about. So you approved the account, Adrian said. I approved an administrative account. Damien told me it was for a new security protocol. I didn't know what it was going to be used for until... She stopped again. Until I did know. And then? And then it was too late to not know. The room was silent for a long moment. Outside the 14th floor windows, Manhattan continued its enormous, unconcerned existence. Lights and traffic and the distant sound of a siren moving somewhere below. Adrian sat down. He had been standing for the entirety of the confrontation, and the act of sitting was the first thing he had done that looked like something was costing him. He put both hands flat on the desk and looked at the documents spread across it and did not speak. Arya watched him. She had seen commanders receive catastrophic information before. The specific way a person absorbs the news that something they built has been broken from the inside. And she had learned that the quality of what came next depended entirely on whether the person's first instinct was toward rage or toward clarity. Rage was faster, clarity was better. Adrian's first instinct was clarity. Here's what happens now, he said. His voice was controlled in the way that things are controlled after a deliberate pause, not because the emotion wasn't there, but because he had made a decision about what to do with it. He looked at Damien. You are going to provide me with a complete accounting of every piece of information you gave to Rayner. Dates, content, method of transfer, everything. He looked at Elena. You're going to do the same for every administrative action you took in connection with this. Every single one. He paused. In return, I will handle this internally rather than externally, which is considerably more in your interests than you currently deserve. Damien's head came up. Handle it internally means... It means I decide the consequences. Not a courtroom. Not Rayner. Me. He met Damien's eyes. That should terrify you more, not less. But it also means your family doesn't read about this in a newspaper. Damien looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the documents on the desk. Then he nodded. Once, minimal, the nod of a man accepting terms he has correctly identified as the least bad option available. Elena said nothing. Her hands were still on the binder. Arya, Adrian said, I need you to do something tonight that falls outside your current role. Tell me. I need you to go to Rayner. The sentence sat in the room. Damien's eyes moved to her. Elena's did too. Go to him how? Arya said carefully. He knows about you. He's already made contact. That means he has already assessed you as a potential asset or a potential obstacle. Adrian looked at her with the full force of whatever had replaced the exhaustion in his face, which was something considerably more operational. I want you to let him believe you're the former. You want me to walk into Victor Rayner's operation and tell him I'm willing to deal. I want you to walk into Victor Rayner's operation and let him believe you're willing to deal, while you document everything you see, everything he tells you, and every financial exposure you can identify. And if he decides I'm an obstacle before I can establish the other option? He won't. He's been trying to get eyes inside this organization for 2 years. He'll want to hear what you have to say before he makes any other decisions. She looked at him. This is not what I signed up for. No, he agreed. It's not. And if I say no, then I find another way, and it takes longer, and the text about your brother's appointment will not be the last one you receive. The calculation was not difficult. It was not comfortable, but it was not difficult. She had made harder calculations in smaller windows with less information and survived all of them. She thought of Danny at the end of the parallel bars, looking straight ahead at the wall, not at his leg. The private agreement. I need everything on Rayner, she said. His operation, his key people, his financial structure, his habits. I need it tonight. Bill will have it ready in 2 hours. I'll need a cover story that holds under pressure. Elena will construct it. He looked at Elena when he said it, and Elena looked back at him. And what passed between them in that look was the complicated transaction of a long relationship surviving a serious wound by converting itself, on the spot, into something more instrumental and considerably less warm. It's the least she can do. Arya turned toward the door. One more thing, Adrian said. She stopped. Rayner's primary office is in a building on West Street. He meets potential associates at a private club in Midtown, a place called the Aldrich. Members only, invitation-based. He paused. He'll invite you within 24 hours of contact. When you walk into that room, you will be the most dangerous person in it. I need you to remember that and act like it. She opened the door. The corridor outside was empty and fluorescent and perfectly ordinary, and she walked down it with the sensation that the floor had not changed texture, but that she was nonetheless walking differently across it, the way the same road feels different at different speeds. She got into the elevator. She stood in the elevator and thought about what she was about to do and felt the specific quality of fear that was not the fear of pain or of failure, but the fear of the version of yourself you might become in the process of surviving something, and whether that version would still be someone you recognized when it was over. The elevator opened on Phil's floor. She walked in. He looked up. I need everything on Victor Rayner, she said, and I need a phone that isn't traceable back to this building. Phil was already typing. 2 hours later, she was standing on a sidewalk in Tribeca with a burner phone, a cover story she had memorized to the molecular level, a name she was not going to use, and the knowledge that in the morning she was going to make contact with the man whose organization had threatened her brother and whose network had been systematically dismantling everything Adrian Volkov had built, and she was going to do it by offering him the one thing he wanted most, the inside of the operation he had been trying to penetrate for 2 years, knowing that everything she said would be a controlled detonation designed to blow up in his hands rather than hers. The burner phone had one number loaded into it, a contact number for Victor Rayner's personal assistant, obtained through channels that Phil had not asked her about and that she had not explained. She looked at the number. She thought about Damian Cross's pale eyes and the 11-second count in her doorway, and Danny's face at the end of the parallel bars, and $63 in a checking account and a business card left on the edge of a table in the amber light of a restaurant where everything had already begun without her knowing. She pressed call. It rang twice. A voice answered, professional, neutral, the voice of someone whose entire function was to be a wall between the person they worked for and the world outside. My name is Sarah Vance, Arya said, using the name Elena had constructed around a complete and verifiable identity. I have information about Adrian Volkov's current operations that Mr. Rayner will want to hear. I'm available to meet at his convenience, tonight, if that's possible. A pause, the sound of a hand covering a phone, muffled consultation. Then, Mr. Rayner is available at 11 p.m., the Aldrich Club on West 54th. Ask for table 7. Arya looked up at the Manhattan skyline, all glass and light, and the specific indifference of a city that had swallowed larger stories than hers without noticing. I'll be there, she said. She ended the call and stood on the sidewalk with the burner phone in her hand, and she understood with the particular clarity that arrives only in the moments before a door closes permanently behind you that she had just made a commitment that had no clean exit, and that the version of herself standing on this sidewalk was the last version that existed before whatever came next, and that whatever came next was going to require her to be something she had spent 4 years carefully. The Aldrich Club occupied the top 2 floors of a building on West 54th that had been a private bank in a previous life and still carried the bones of that history. Marble floors worn smooth by decades of expensive shoes, ceilings that required a particular kind of money to maintain, the kind of quiet that was not the absence of sound, but the deliberate exclusion of it. The doorman looked at Arya with the practiced neutrality of someone who had been paid well enough to find every kind of person unremarkable. She gave the name Sarah Vance. He checked a list, nodded, stepped aside. She had dressed for it. Not elaborately. Elena had been precise about that, had said that walking into Rayner's environment overdressed was as dangerous as walking in underdressed, that the correct register was expensive but careless, money worn the way people wear things they've always had rather than things they recently acquired. Black jacket, good fabric, nothing that caught light. Hair down. The encrypted drive was in the inside pocket against her ribs. The burner phone was in her right jacket pocket. Her own phone was back at the office. She had memorized the floor plan Phil had found. Approximate, sourced from a building permit filed 8 years ago, but structures like this did not change their bones. She knew where the exits were before she stepped off the elevator. Table 7 was in an alcove off the main room, set slightly apart from the other tables in the way that powerful people arrange their environments to create the illusion that privacy is something that happens to them naturally rather than something they construct deliberately. Victor Rayner was already seated when she arrived, which meant he had been there before 11, which meant he was the kind of man who arrived early to watch people enter rooms. Another form of control, another way of owning the first impression. He was smaller than she had expected. Photographs, Phil had noted, were often from flattering angles. In person, Rayner was compact and slightly below average height, with a head of silver gray hair worn precisely and a face that carried its age in the eyes rather than the skin, not lined so much as thoroughly informed, the face of someone who had been paying close attention for a very long time and had stopped being surprised by what he found. He stood when she approached, old-fashioned in the specific way that certain powerful men are old-fashioned, not out of respect for women, but out of a habit of choreographing every interaction down to its opening gesture. "Miss Vance!" He extended a hand. She shook it, firm, brief, the grip of someone who did not need to establish anything through pressure. "Mr. Rayner." They sat. A waiter appeared and disappeared with the smoothness of a well-run operation. Wine was poured. Rayner did not touch his immediately, and neither did she. "You said you have information about Adrian Volkov's operations," he said. No preamble, no small talk. She had expected that. People who controlled rooms rarely needed the lubricant of pleasantry. "What kind of information?" "The kind that explains why his current security structure has a gap you haven't been able to identify through the channels you've been using," she said. Something shifted in his face. A controlled adjustment, the kind that meant she had said something that landed with more precision than he had expected. "You've been with the organization for 2 weeks." 12 days. "And you've already identified a gap his senior people haven't closed in 3 years. His senior people have been looking at it from the inside. I came in from the outside." She paused. "And his senior people have their own complications." "Cross," Rayner said. She did not confirm or deny. She picked up her wine glass, turned it once in her fingers without drinking, set it down, a gesture that communicated comfort with the room without commitment to the conversation. "I'm not here to discuss your existing arrangements. I'm here to discuss what I can offer that supersedes them." Rayner looked at her. In the amber light of the alcove, his eyes had a quality she had identified in a handful of people over the course of her life, the quality of someone for whom other human beings were primarily information sources, and who had organized their entire social architecture around extracting maximum data with minimum expenditure. It was not a cruel quality exactly. It was something more impersonal than cruelty. "Why?" he said. "Simply that." "Why what? Why would someone 12 days into a new position, with no established loyalty and no demonstrated personal grievance against the organization, walk into a room with me?" He tilted his head slightly. "That's the question, Ms. Vance. The information is secondary. The motive is primary." She had prepared for this. Elena had drilled it. The cover story required a motive that was specific enough to be believable and personal enough to be verifiable at the surface level without holding up under deep investigation. Because deep investigation would take time she wasn't going to give him. The motive was Danny. Not the real Danny. A version of Danny whose medical situation had been slightly restructured into a story about insurance fraud by a previous employer. A grievance against the system that a woman in Aria's cover biography would have, and that produced a very clean, very human explanation for why someone might decide to monetize their access to an organization they had just joined. She told the story. She told it the way Elena had coached her to tell it, with the specific flatness of someone who has converted a painful thing into a practical problem and is no longer interested in the emotional content, only the solution. She watched Rayner listen. She watched him assess. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then, "How much do you want?" She named a number. It was the number Elena had calculated, high enough to be credible, not so high as to be implausible for someone in her nominal position. Rayner looked at it, nodded once. "What can you give me in the next 72 hours? The schedule of every shipment moving through Volkov's import-export operations for the next 6 weeks. The financial architecture of the real estate development firm. Specifically, the 3 partnerships that are structured as debt instruments rather than equity. And the name of the person inside who has been cooperating with you. along with documentation of that cooperation that you can use as leverage or as distance, depending on which becomes necessary. The last piece made Rayner go very still. "You know about Cross," he said. "I know about both of them," she said. A pause. Rayner picked up his wine glass and drank, and over the rim of the glass his eyes did not leave her face. He was recalculating. She could feel it. The specific quality of a man revising his assessment of a situation that he had believed he fully understood. "Both," he repeated. "Cross and the admin credential holder who made the technical side possible. You have one. You don't have the other because the other has been more careful. But without the other, the documentation trail has a gap that a competent federal investigator would notice inside 48 hours." She watched him absorb this. What she had just offered him was not simply information. It was the suggestion that his existing arrangement was incomplete and potentially dangerous, and that she was the solution to the incompleteness. It was an elegant piece of misdirection, and the elegance of it made her profoundly uncomfortable, because she was good at it, and being good at something like this was a form of knowledge about yourself that you could not unknow. "I'll need verification," he said, "before any arrangement is finalized." "Of course. I'll need to speak with someone inside the organization who can confirm your access level." "That can be arranged." She had expected this. Phil had built a shadow access point, a system artifact that would confirm to anyone who queried it from outside that Sarah Vance had Tier 2 access to Volkov's operational database. The artifact would hold for approximately 18 hours before the inconsistencies became visible. 18 hours was more than she needed. "Tomorrow evening," Rayner said, 6 o'clock. I'll have my technical team run the verification. If it holds, we finalize the arrangement." She nodded. "One condition." He waited. "The contact with my brother's medical situation. That stops. Tonight. I'm not negotiating while someone is holding that over me." Rayner's face did not change, but something behind it did. A slight readjustment, the look of a man recalibrating who, in his operation, had made a decision he had not authorized. "That was not my instruction," he said. Quiet. Controlled. But the control had a new edge to it. "I assume not," she said. "I'm raising it so we're clear." "We're clear." He picked up his phone, sent a text without showing her the screen, put it back down. "It's handled." She nodded, stood, extended her hand again. He shook it. She walked out of the Aldrich Club at 11:41 p.m. and stood on West 54th in the cold air and breathed once, twice, 3 times, with the controlled deliberateness of someone managing a physiological response that was entirely appropriate given the circumstances, and which she could not afford to fully experience until she was somewhere private. She walked 2 blocks before she took out the burner phone, called Adrian. "It held," she said. "He wants verification tomorrow at 6. Phil's artifact needs to be in place by 4. A pause. "Are you all right?" She considered the question with more honesty than she usually applied to it. "I'm functional." "That's not what I asked." "It's what I can tell you right now." She stopped at a corner, looked up at the street sign. "Tomorrow at 6, when his technical team runs the verification and finds what Phil built, he's going to give me something. Access to his financial records, or his operational schedule, or both. Whatever he offers as good faith before the finalization. That's the window. Phil will be ready. Elena needs to be ready too. The documentation has to be airtight. Whatever we capture tomorrow has to be clean enough that it doesn't disappear in a legal argument about how it was obtained. Elena understands what's at stake. Elena is going to be managing her own legal exposure for the foreseeable future. Make sure that's not affecting her work." A pause that acknowledged the directness of this without arguing with it. "I'll make sure." She ended the call, stood on the corner for a moment longer, then she walked to the subway, took it uptown, and did not sleep until close to 4 in the morning. The following 18 hours had the specific quality of time that moves in 2 registers simultaneously, agonizingly slow in the waiting and blindingly fast in the moments that mattered. Phil worked through the night and into the afternoon on the verification artifact. Elena, operating with the precise, slightly mechanical efficiency of someone who has converted guilt into usefulness, built the documentation package, a structured file of everything Rayner's team would expose in the process of accepting what they thought was inside access, cross-referenced against the existing evidence of the shipment interception and the shell company trail and Damien's badge records. Arya spent the morning reviewing everything. She read it twice, made 3 corrections to the timeline on page 9, and identified a gap in the financial cross-referencing that Phil closed in 20 minutes. By 2 in the afternoon, she was as prepared as preparation made possible. At 4:15, her phone rang. Real phone, not the burner. St. Vincent's, the nursing staff line, not the billing department. She answered it before the second ring. "Miss Mercer, this is Rosa, Danny's therapist. I want you to know that everything is fine," Rosa said immediately, with the tone of someone who understood that a call from a hospital required that sentence before anything else. "There was a man in the lobby this morning asking for Danny's room number. Our front desk didn't give it to him. We have the flag on file as you requested, but I wanted you to know." Arya closed her eyes, opened them. What did he look like? Rosa described someone who matched none of the faces she had cataloged. Not Damien, not anyone from Rayner's operation that Phil had photographed. A contractor then, arm's length. "Is Danny aware?" Arya said. "No, he had a good session this morning. He walked the full length twice." She pressed the phone against her ear for a moment, felt the specific ache of that detail. Danny walking the full length twice, landing in the middle of everything else. "Thank you, Rosa. The man in the lobby. Did he leave when the desk refused him?" "Yes, right away." "Thank you." She called Adrian, told him. He called the person he had stationed at St. Vincent's and confirmed coverage. Arya sat with the phone in her hand for a moment after and thought about Danny walking the full length twice, and let that be the thing she was doing this for rather than any of the larger and more abstract reasons. Because the large and abstract reasons were harder to hold on to, and Danny walking the full length twice was specific and true and enough. At 6 p.m., she walked into a building on Lexington Avenue that Rayner's assistant had specified, a different location from the Aldrich, more corporate, the kind of anonymous office floor that companies leased for meetings they did not want traceable to their primary address. Rayner was there, along with 2 people she hadn't seen before, a man with the careful, slightly compressed energy of a technical specialist, and a woman who stood near the window with her arms crossed, and the look of someone who had seen more of these meetings than she found interesting. The technical specialist ran the verification. Phil's artifact held. She watched him work and read his face as he found what he was supposed to find, and the slight unclenching of his posture when the access confirmed told her it had worked. Rayner nodded to the woman by the window. The woman opened a laptop and turned it toward Arya. "Good faith," Rayner said. 6 weeks of operational scheduling and the primary financial account structure for 3 of our import-export channels. In exchange for the shipment schedule and the documentation on your organization's internal cooperation, which I expect within 24 hours. Arya looked at the laptop screen. The data was there, clean, detailed, exactly the kind of financial architecture that Phil had described as the thing that would, in the hands of the right federal investigators, expose the full scope of what Rayner had been building for 6 years. Account numbers, transfer schedules, partner identifications. She reached into her jacket pocket, produced a USB drive, not the encrypted drive with the real evidence, but a second drive Phil had prepared, which contained a partial version of the shipment schedule and a carefully edited subset of the documentation, enough to be credible as a first installment, not enough to complete any picture that wasn't already visible. She handed it to Rayner. He took it, gave it to the technical specialist. While the specialist was reading it, Arya's phone, the burner, sent a text. 1 word from Phil's system, green. The data transfer she had authorized Phil to initiate the moment she confirmed the laptop was open had completed. Rayner's financial records, his operational schedule, his partner identifications, all of it had been captured through the remote access that Phil had embedded in the verification artifact, the same one that had confirmed her false credentials. In accepting the verification query, Rayner's technical team had opened a door they had not known was a door. Everything on that laptop was now on a server that Phil controlled. And in approximately 45 minutes, a federal investigator named Suzanne Park, who had been building a case against Victor Rayner's financial network for 19 months, and who had been waiting for the piece that completed the evidentiary picture, was going to receive an encrypted package from a source she had been told to expect. Arya stood in the anonymous meeting room on Lexington Avenue and looked at Victor Rayner looking at the drive she had handed him, and she thought about the word disciplined, which had been the first word Adrian had ever said to her. and she understood something about it that she had not understood in the restaurant. That discipline was not about restraint in the moment of action. It was about the patience to build the moment so that the action, when it came, was already finished before anyone in the room knew it had started. "I'll have the remainder to you within 24 hours, she said. Raynor nodded. "I'll be in touch about the next phase." She left. On the street outside, she walked 3 blocks north before she stopped and took out the burner and called Phil. "It transferred clean? Every file. Suzanne Park's office gets it in 30 minutes. I added the shell company documentation and the badge logs as a supplementary package. She'll have the full picture on Damien and Elena too. Does Adrian know?" "He's been watching the transfer in real time." She put the burner in her pocket, stood on the sidewalk in the early evening, the city doing its constant, relentless thing around her, and felt the specific deflation that follows high-stakes performance. Not relief, not triumph, but the draining away of the particular tension that had been holding her upright for the last 36 hours, leaving something quieter and less defined in its place. She took the subway to St. Vincent's. Danny was in his room when she arrived, the television on but unwatched, a book open on his lap that he was also not reading. He looked up when she came in and read her face the way he always read her face, quickly, with the fluency of someone who had been doing it for 26 years. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you." "I mean it. What happened?" She sat in the chair beside his bed. The chair had a small tear in the vinyl on the right armrest that she had been aware of for 11 months. She put her hand over it out of habit. "I changed jobs." "Again?" "The last one didn't work out." "And the new one?" She thought about how to answer that. Outside the window, the courtyard was dark. The pigeon had gone wherever pigeons went at night, and the pavement was wet from a brief early evening rain she hadn't been outside to see. "The new one is more complicated, but I think it's going to be okay." Danny looked at her for a long moment with the eyes that were their mother's and the jaw that was their father's, and the specific perceptiveness of a man who had been lying in a hospital bed for 11 months with nothing to do but think and observe. "Are you in trouble?" "No." "Arya." "I was. I'm not anymore." She met his eyes. "I promise." He held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded once and looked back at the television, and she understood that he was giving her the gift of not pressing further, that he had decided, for now, to trust the promise rather than the evidence, and that this was its own kind of love. They sat together for an hour. They talked about the television show he had been watching, about Rosa's assessment of his progress, about the view from the courtyard window in the morning. None of it was what either of them was actually thinking about, and both of them knew that, and it didn't matter, because sometimes sitting in the same room with someone you have been frightened for is sufficient. Sometimes the fact of presence is the entire thing. When she left, she hugged him in the doorway, longer than usual. He let her, which meant he was more frightened than he had let on, because Danny did not hold still for prolonged physical contact as a rule. "Rosa says I walked the full length twice today," he said into her shoulder. "I know," she said. "She called me." He pulled back, looked at her. "You had her flag you." "I had her flag me." He shook his head, started to say something, stopped, shook his head again. "You're impossible." "I'm thorough," she said. "It's different." She took the subway back downtown. 3 days later, the news arrived in pieces. Not in headlines, because the kind of federal action that dismantled a financial network the size of Raynor's did not happen in a single dramatic moment, visible from the outside. It happened in the quiet language of asset freezes and subpoenas, and the specific silence that descends over an operation when the people at the center of it understand simultaneously that the architecture they have built has been compromised at its foundation and that the time for decisions has already passed. Phil showed her the initial reports on his monitor. She read them without expression. Damian Cross had been suspended pending the federal inquiry. He had retained a lawyer within hours of learning that Investigator Park's office had received the documentation, which told Arya that he had been watching for exactly this kind of development, that some part of him had known the frame he built would eventually come apart, and had been waiting for it with the particular exhausted resignation of a man who is very good at postponing consequences, but has never found a way to eliminate them. Elena had cooperated fully with both Adrian's internal process and the federal investigators. Her cooperation had been immediate and detailed in the way that things are immediate and detailed when a person has been carrying the weight of a decision for months and the opportunity to put it down is finally available. What happened to her professionally would take time to resolve. What happened to her personally? The specific alteration that occurs in a person's relationship to themselves after they have done something they cannot undo had already happened, and no resolution was going to address it. Victor Rayner had not been arrested. The financial exposure was significant, and the federal case would take months to build into charges that would hold. But his operational capacity had been severed at multiple points simultaneously. Partners who had seen the asset freeze news had begun distancing themselves with the speed of people who understood that proximity to a collapsing structure was its own kind of liability. The 6-year edifice he had been constructing in the space adjacent to Adrian's operations was not gone, but it had been reduced in the span of 72 hours from a threat to a problem, and a problem was something that could be managed. Arya sat in her office, her actual office now, the small one with the humming fluorescent light, and looked at this assessment on the screen in front of her and felt very little of what she had expected to feel. Not triumph. Triumph required a cleaner kind of victory than this. What had happened was not a defeat of something bad, so much as a controlled reduction of something dangerous. And the people who had been damaged in the process, Damien, Elena, the partner relationships that had been built over years and then used as leverage and then burned, were not abstractions. They were people who had made specific choices and who were now living in the specific consequences of those choices. And none of that felt simple. She thought of Gerald Holt on the floor of Rosario's restaurant, looking up at the amber lighting with the expression of a man whose map of the world had been revised. She thought of the open drawer in her apartment and the rain and $63 and the weight of a business card through wet denim. She thought of every point in the last weeks at which she could have walked away and had not. And she tried to assess, honestly, whether the person who had not walked away had been right to stay. She thought she had been. She was not entirely certain. That uncertainty felt like the most honest thing available to her. Adrian knocked on her office door at 7 in the evening. Knocked, which she noted because he was a man who usually simply entered. "Come in." He came in, sat in the chair across from her desk, the spare one she had not yet done anything with, which was covered in folders she'd been meaning to file. He moved 2 folders and sat down. Looked at her. "How are you?" he said. "I've been asked that a lot lately." "I know. I'm asking anyway." She leaned back in her chair. The fluorescent light hummed. Outside the window, the city was doing its evening shift change, the pace altering in the way it altered every day at this hour. Slightly slower, slightly louder, the particular quality of a city transitioning from the work of the day to whatever it did at night. "I'm tired," she said, "and I'm okay." Both of those things are true at the same time. He nodded. That was something she had come to understand about Adrian Volkov over the weeks of working in close proximity to him, that he did not fill silences reflexively, that he was capable of sitting with someone else's honest answer without immediately converting it into a problem to solve. It was rarer than it should have been. "I want to talk about your role going forward," he said. "I know. The position you've been filling is not the position you were hired for. What you did in the last week, the analysis, the identification of the internal breach, the Rayner operation, that's a different function, a more senior one. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "I want to offer you a partnership position, not an employment arrangement. An actual structural role in the organization's leadership. Decisions made jointly, not reported upward." He paused. "It comes with a different kind of accountability. You would be responsible not just for your own actions, but for the direction and ethics of how the organization operates." She looked at him. "Ethics?" "Yes. You're asking the person you brought in to be unwitting bait to take responsibility for the organization's ethics. I'm asking the person who identified a frame built around her before she arrived, dismantled it, while building a parallel operation against an external threat, protected her own brother, and did all of it without causing any injury to anyone who hadn't already chosen to be in harm's way. Yes, I'm asking that person." He paused. "Because that person appears to be the only one in this organization who did all of those things simultaneously and still came out the other side with clean hands." She thought about the Aldrich Club and the man who had not been cruel exactly, had been something more impersonal than cruelty, and the drive she had handed him that contained carefully edited partial truths, and whether clean hands was the precisely accurate description. "I have one condition," she said. He waited. "Any operation that uses an uninvolved person, anyone who hasn't made a deliberate choice to be in this world, stops. I don't mean it becomes a last resort. I mean, it stops. No exceptions, no special circumstances, no strategic necessity arguments. If a situation arises where the only solution involves someone who didn't sign up for it, we find another solution or we accept the loss." He looked at her for a long moment. The evaluation in his face was not of whether she was serious. She could see that he already knew she was serious. It was the evaluation of a man deciding whether a principle of that clarity was something he could build into the architecture of how he operated and actually maintain. "Agreed," he said. "Without exceptions," she said again. "Without exceptions." She nodded, looked at the window. The city was fully in its evening register now. The lights of the buildings across the street reflected in the glass of the office window, layered over her own reflection looking back at her. A woman in a small office with a humming fluorescent light, in a job she had not sought, having just agreed to a responsibility she had not planned on, with her brother walking the full length of the parallel bars twice this morning, and $63 that were no longer $63, and a business card that she had almost thrown away in the rain. "I want to visit Danny tomorrow," she said, "during the day. Not an evening visit, during the day, when Rosa is there. I want to watch the full session." "Of course." "And I want Thursday afternoons blocked in perpetuity. His appointment is Thursdays." "Done." She turned back from the window, looked at Adrian across the desk. "Okay," she said. He stood, extended his hand. She shook it, and it was a different kind of handshake from the one in the Aldrich Club, heavier, quieter, the kind that acknowledges what it costs rather than performing confidence about what it promises. He left her office. She sat for a while after, not thinking exactly, more allowing the residue of the last weeks to settle into whatever shape it was going to settle into, the way sediment settles in water after a disturbance, slowly finding the bottom without being directed. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening after Danny's session, she walked past Rosario's on 47th Street. She did not plan to. She was taking a longer route back to the subway because the weather was for the first time that fall, something that deserved to be walked in. Clear and cold, the kind of cold that made the city look cleaned. She turned onto 47th without thinking and found herself standing on the sidewalk across from the restaurant before she had made a conscious decision to be there. The amber light was visible through the window. Inside, the tables were full. A woman was clearing a table in the section where table 9 had been. She could see it from the sidewalk, the geometry of the room familiar in the specific way that places are familiar when something significant has happened in them. A new server, clearly, moving with the particular combination of speed and anxiety that marked the first months of the job. Someone she did not know. She stood on the sidewalk and looked through the window for a moment. She was not looking for anything specific. She was not conducting a sentimental inventory of how far she had come, which was the kind of thing people did in stories and which she had always found faintly dishonest, because the distance between where you had been and where you were was rarely as clean as distance implied. What she was doing was simpler than that. She was looking at a room where something had happened, and she was acknowledging that it had happened, and she was noting that she was on the outside of the window instead of the inside, and that this was different, and that different was not the same as better, but that it was, at minimum, true. A couple walked past her on the sidewalk, close together against the cold, not talking, the specific comfortable silence of two people who have been in each other's company long enough that silence is a form of conversation. She watched them pass. Then she turned away from the window and kept walking. The subway entrance was half a block ahead. She took the stairs down without slowing, the same stairs she had descended weeks ago in a wet jacket with $63 and a stranger's business card, and a hand that had just put a man on the floor of a restaurant and not known yet whether that was the end of something or the beginning. She knew now, not everything, not the shape of what came next, or how Danny's leg would continue to heal, or what the federal case against Rayner would eventually produce, or what version of herself would emerge from the specific experience of having been someone's instrument and having turned that instrumentality back on them and having done it cleanly, or as cleanly as these things could be done. She didn't know any of that. What she knew was smaller and more durable than any of it. She knew that she had stopped hiding in the particular way she had been hiding, behind the apron, behind the careful smallness, behind the discipline that had calcified over 4 years into something that looked like control and was actually a form of disappearance. She knew that disappearing had stopped being an option the moment a man put his hand around her wrist and the training arrived without consulting her, and that the life she had been building around the maintenance of invisibility had always been provisional, always waiting for exactly that kind of interruption. She knew that what came after interruption was not resolution. It was just continuation, harder, better informed, with less room for the particular comfort of pretending you were smaller than you were. The train came out of the dark. She got on, found a seat. The car was half full. Evening commuters, a man with headphones, a teenager with a backpack, an older woman reading something on her phone with the focused pleasure of someone who has found a good story and is in no hurry to finish it. Arya leaned her head back against the seat, closed her eyes, felt the train move. She did not think about the Aldrich Club or the fluorescent office light or the moment in Rayner's meeting room when the burner phone said green and she had known it was finished before anyone else in the room knew anything had started. She did not think about Damien's pale eyes or Elena's hands on the binder or the 48 hours she had agreed to and then abandoned. She thought about Danny's hands on the parallel bars, the way he had not looked at his leg, the private agreement he had made with himself about what was acceptable and what the acceptable thing required of him, which was simply to keep going without commentary, to put one foot in front of the other in the most literal available sense and trust that the ground would be there. It was the most honest instruction she had ever received from anyone, and he had not known he was giving it. The train moved through the dark under the city, and Arya Mercer rode it with her eyes closed and her hands loose in her lap, and her breathing even, and she did not think about what she was afraid of, because fear was a thing she knew how to carry, and she was carrying it, and that was enough. And the city moved above her in its enormous continuing life, and she was part of it, and that too was enough.